Welcome back to Panda's Nightmares. Tonight, we're exploring facts so mind-blowing, they sound like they couldn't possibly be real. These are the kinds of truths that make you stop, think, and maybe even question reality itself. From bizarre historical events to mind-bending science, these facts will leave you saying, that can't be true, can it? Before we get started, I want to share something personal. I'm raising funds for my dad's medical treatment, and your support would mean the world to me. If you'd like to help, the GoFundMe link is in the description below. Thank you for being here, and now, let's dive into these unbelievable truths. Story 1. In the 1950s, Popular Mechanics ran a story about a former artillery sergeant who attempted to pioneer a personal delivery system that, in hindsight, seems like a chaotic precursor to Amazon's drone delivery ambitions. However, instead of drones, this ambitious inventor used modified artillery shells. The sergeant managed to get his hands on an M116 howitzer, which he used to fire hollowed-out shells over a small town in upstate New York. His plan was straightforward, albeit wildly reckless. The shells were equipped with a parachute that would deploy as they approached their targets, gently delivering the goods inside. The problem: each shell weighed about 20 pounds, and if the parachute failed to deploy, it meant a 20-pound missile would plummet to Earth, potentially smashing through someone's roof or causing catastrophic injury. During testing, a few such mishaps reportedly occurred, causing considerable damage and raising understandable concerns among the townsfolk. Undeterred by these setbacks, the sergeant doubled down. Convinced his system was the future of delivery, he proposed an innovative solution to the dangers he had created, selling homeowners expensive iron plating for their roofs and heavy-duty armor for pedestrians to wear while walking the streets. This sergeant's misadventure has since become something of a cautionary tale and an inside joke among marketers of modern technology and software. It's often referenced as a classic example of creating an unnecessary problem and then selling an impractical, costly solution. Whether the artillery sergeant was ahead of his time or simply out of his mind, his story remains a bizarre footnote in the history of invention. Story 2. The story of Adidas and Puma begins with the Dassler brothers, Rudolf, Rudi, and Adolf Adi Dassler, who grew up in a modest German family in Herzogenaurach, Bavaria. The small town would later become the epicenter of one of the fiercest rivalries in sportswear history. Adi, the younger brother, had a passion for innovation and craftsmanship. In the 1920s, he began producing handmade athletic shoes in his mother's laundry room. His designs were ahead of their time, combining functionality with comfort, and quickly garnered attention from athletes. Rudi, the more outgoing and business-savvy sibling, joined the venture, and together they founded the Gebruder Dassler, Schuhfabrik Dassler Brothers Shoe Factory. In 1924, the partnership flourished in the early years. Their big break came during the 1936 Berlin Olympics, when American sprinter Jesse Owens wore Dassler-made shoes and won for gold medals. This victory catapulted the brothers into the global spotlight, establishing their reputation as premier athletic shoemakers. Despite their professional success, tension brewed between the brothers. Their personalities often clashed. Adi was meticulous and introverted, while Rudi was brash and combative. Their relationship deteriorated further during World War II, when both were conscripted into the German war effort. Adi continued making shoes for soldiers, while Rudi was called to active military service. Rudi reportedly believed that Adi had intentionally sabotaged him by informing the authorities, a suspicion that sowed deep mistrust. The animosity reached a boiling point after the war. While the exact details remain murky, one oft-cited story involves an air raid during the war. As Adi and his wife entered a bomb shelter where Rudi and his family were already hiding, Adi reportedly muttered, "The dirty bastards are back again," referring to the Allied bombers. Rudi, however, believed the comment was aimed at him and his family, fueling the rift. In 1948, the partnership dissolved, and the Dassler brothers went their separate ways. Rudi established a new company he initially called Ruder, a portmanteau of Rudolf Dassler, later rebranded as Puma. Meanwhile, Adi renamed the original family business, Adidas, combining his first and last names. The split wasn't just between the brothers, it divided their hometown as well. Herzogenaurach became known as the town of bent necks, because people would look down at your shoes to determine which company you supported. Employees of Adidas and Puma were discouraged from fraternizing with each other, and even local businesses and sports teams aligned with one brand or the other. The competition between the two brands intensified over the years, with both striving for dominance in the global sportswear market. Puma made significant strides in football, soccer, by signing Brazilian star, while Adidas focused on track and field events and later dominated basketball in the United States. Both companies introduced game-changing innovations in athletic footwear, fueling their rivalry. The Dassler brothers never reconciled, and they are buried in the same Herzogenaurach cemetery, but as far apart as possible. Despite their personal animosity, their rivalry propelled both companies to become global giants in the sportswear industry. Adidas is now a multi-billion-dollar corporation, known for its iconic three-stripe logo, while Puma remains a leading brand in performance and lifestyle products. Story 3. Joan Pujol Garcia, a Spaniard during World War II, is one of the most fascinating double agents in history. Initially, he approached the Allies offering to spy for them, but they turned him down. Undeterred, he approached the Nazis, who accepted him and gave him the codename Arabelle. Once he gained credibility as a Nazi spy, he approached the Allies again and this time was hired as a double agent, earning the codename Garbo. What followed was an extraordinary tale of deception. Garcia masterfully fed the Germans a mix of misinformation, true but useless details, and high-value intelligence that conveniently arrived too late to be of any use. To bolster his credibility, he invented a spy network consisting of 27 subagents. Remarkably, none of these subagents actually existed. Despite their non-existence, Garcia regularly submitted expense reports for them, and the Nazis, completely fooled, funded their salaries. At one point, Garcia needed to explain why critical information had been delayed. He claimed that one of his spies had died. The Nazis not only accepted this excuse, but even paid a pension to the imaginary spy's imaginary widow. Through his elaborate fabrications, Garcia caused the Nazis to waste millions of dollars on false intelligence. Garcia's greatest contribution came during D-Day. He convinced the Germans that the Normandy landings were merely a diversion, and that the real attack was yet to come at Pas-de-Calais. This ruse kept German forces away from the actual front lines, significantly aiding the Allies' success. For his efforts, Garcia achieved the rare distinction of receiving both the Iron Cross from the Germans, requiring Hitler's personal approval, since Garcia wasn't a soldier, and an MBE member of the Order of the British Empire, from King George VI. His incredible story remains a testament to the power of ingenuity and deception in warfare. Story 4. The ability to mime convincingly relies on your brain's proprioception, its capacity to perceive the position and movement of your limbs, without needing to directly observe them. This is what allows someone to mimic actions like pulling a rope or climbing a ladder without using any actual objects. However, this intuitive sense does not extend to internal organs. For example, while you are aware of your heart's presence, you cannot consciously perceive its position or movement in the same way you can with your hands or feet. Interestingly, the tongue exists in a gray area between these two categories. Although it is part of your body and technically internal, its mobility and sensory functions make it unique. Because of this, mimicking an action like brushing your tongue is surprisingly challenging to perform accurately. as it is neither fully external nor entirely internal in our perception. Story 5. Mad Jack Churchill was a soldier like no other. A man whose exploits during World War II earned him a reputation for fearlessness and eccentricity. Churchill was the kind of person who saw a battlefield not just as a place for war, but as a stage for his unique flair. During the D-Day landings, while others braced themselves for the harrowing assault, Mad Jack confidently strode up the beach, playing the bagpipes. Yes, you read that correctly. He carried not just bagpipes, but also a longbow and a Scottish broadsword. He even holds the distinction of having the only confirmed longbow kill in World War II. His philosophy was best captured in his own words: "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly armed." One of his most legendary feats came when he captured 42 Nazis single-handedly. Armed with nothing more than his broadsword, Churchill managed to subdue and take them prisoner. Such boldness and eccentricity were why he was called Mad Jack. Even after the war, his antics were remarkable. In Burma, upon hearing of Japan's surrender following the atomic bombings, Churchill expressed disappointment, saying, "If it weren't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years. In the post-war years, Churchill's heroism continued when he helped evacuate 700 Jewish hospital patients in Palestine during an Arab-led massacre. Later, during his tenure at a land warfare school in Australia, he became an enthusiastic advocate of surfing, reportedly becoming one of the first to ride the waves in the area. In retirement, he never lost his humor. Each day, on his train commute home, Churchill would throw his briefcase out of the window to amuse himself and startle passengers, knowing it would land in his garden where he could retrieve it later. Mad Jack Churchill lived to the ripe old age of 89, passing away in 1996. Along the way, he earned 2 distinguished service orders and left behind a legacy of bravery, eccentricity, and unrelenting spirit. God bless you, Jack. What a legend. Story 6. During World War II, there was a Finnish sniper whose name, Simo He, may be tricky for some to pronounce, but his deeds earned him the chilling nickname, the White Death. He became a legendary figure during the Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union, using his skill, cunning, and intimate knowledge of the snowy countryside to wreak havoc on the Red Army. Dressed in white camouflage and operating in brutal winter conditions, he became a one-man army. Over the course of just 100 days, he racked up over 500 confirmed kills. However, many estimate his actual tally to exceed 800, making him one of the most lethal snipers in history. The Soviets were so terrified of Hijaz's effectiveness that they launched increasingly desperate attempts to eliminate him. First, they sent a counter-sniper to track and kill him, but he'd quickly turned the tables. Next, they dispatched an entire team of counter-snipers, only for them to vanish. Presumed killed by He. Even artillery bombardments aimed at destroying his known hunting grounds failed to neutralize him. Each time, He emerged unscathed, continuing to strike fear into the enemy ranks. Despite his remarkable feats, he was not invincible. In March 1940, just days before the Winter War ended, he was shot in the jaw by an explosive round. Gravely injured and left for dead, he was found and evacuated by his comrades. Miraculously, he survived, regaining consciousness on the very day that peace was declared. Simo He lived a long life after the war, passing away in 2002 at the age of 96. His extraordinary skill, resilience, and bravery cemented his legacy as one of the greatest snipers of all time. And the White Death remains an enduring symbol of Finnish determination and ingenuity. Story 7. In 1859, the United States and Britain, then governing Canada, nearly went to war over the death of a single pig, an incident now known as the Pig War. It began on San Juan Island, a disputed territory between the two nations. A British farmer's pig wandered onto an American farmer's land and was shot, sparking an international dispute that escalated into a military standoff, lasting over 13 years. Both nations sent troops to occupy the island, with the Americans led by Captain George Pickett, later infamous for Pickett's Charge, and the British bolstering their forces with Royal Marines. Despite the potential for serious conflict, the war turned into an almost farcical affair. No human casualties occurred aside from the unfortunate pig, and the only recorded injury was a British Marine who was struck in the eye by a rock thrown from the American lines. The injury was minor, and he continued his service. In fact, the troops on both sides developed a surprisingly friendly relationship during the standoff. British soldiers would often trade rum, a daily ration for Royal Marines, with the Americans for fresh food, which the British troops were lacking. The camaraderie on the ground made it clear that neither side was interested in true hostilities. The standoff ended only after Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany was brought in as a neutral arbitrator in 1872. His decision favored the United States, and the troops withdrew peacefully. By this time, Canada had become an independent nation, and the incident became a curious footnote in history. Today, San Juan Island National Historical Park commemorates this peculiar conflict. It is the only U.S. national park where the British flag is still raised daily, a nod to the odd but peaceful resolution of the Pig War. Story 8. Everything that makes up you has been part of Earth's ecosystem for millions of years. Your atoms, your molecules, every element in your body has been endlessly recycled through life, death, and the natural world. You're alive for maybe 80 years, a brief spark in this vast cycle. Then, everything that is, you will once again merge back into Earth's ecosystem, continuing the eternal process for millions of years more. This means something incredible. The very substance of who you are was once part of your ancestors. Their lives didn't just influence your existence, they are your existence. And not just your human ancestors. The molecules that compose you were part of the dinosaurs. They swam in ancient oceans, grew in primordial forests, and soared in the atmosphere of a younger Earth. We didn't simply replace the dinosaurs, we were the dinosaurs. You don't need to be a scientist to appreciate how profoundly interconnected and astonishing nature is. Just take a walk on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Think about the soil, the trees, the air, and the life around you. Every bit of it has been part of this endless cycle, and so have you. Nature's absurdity, beauty, and continuity are all there, waiting to blow your mind. Story 9. Since the speed of light is a constant velocity, c, and velocity is defined as distance over time. This means that no matter how small the distance a photon has to travel, it still requires some non-zero amount of time to cover that distance. This implies that everything we see is technically happening in the past. This delay is so infinitesimally small in most everyday contexts that it's effectively zero for practical purposes. However, it remains a measurable non-zero value. This also doesn't account for the time it takes your eyes and brain to process the incoming light. In essence, what we perceive as the present is always slightly lagging behind the true present, making everything we experience technically a glimpse into the past. Story 10. Australian pilot Frederick Valentich was flying over the Bass Strait in 1978 when he radioed air traffic control with a chilling report. He was being followed by an unidentified object. The strange craft he described had 4 bright lights and a metallic appearance, and it was behaving erratically, coming dangerously close to his plane. As the object approached even closer, Valentich was able to observe it in more detail. In his final transmission, he stated, "It's not an aircraft." Moments later, the radio signal was interrupted by 17 seconds of an eerie, metallic scraping noise. Then, silence. Valentich never arrived at his destination. and despite a massive 7-day search by air and sea, neither he nor his plane were ever found. To this day, his disappearance remains one of aviation's most enduring mysteries. Story 11. In 1814, London witnessed a bizarre and tragic event, now known as the London Beer Flood. Several massive vats at the Horseshoe Brewery ruptured, unleashing a tidal wave of beer that flooded the streets. The wave destroyed buildings, caused significant damage, and tragically claimed the lives of multiple people, either from drowning or injuries caused by the flood. Similarly, in 1919, Boston experienced the Great Molasses Flood. A gigantic storage tank holding over 2 million gallons of molasses burst, sending a sticky, deadly wave through the streets. The flood swept away buildings, crushed structures, and killed nearly 24 people, while injuring many others. Rescue efforts were hampered by the thick, viscous molasses, making it one of Boston's most unusual disasters. Even earlier, in 1518, Strasbourg was struck by one of history's most puzzling phenomena, the dancing plague. It began with a woman, Frau Truffia, who inexplicably started dancing in the streets. Her fervent dancing lasted for days, and within a week, 34 others had joined her. Within a month, the number rose to about 400 people. Some danced until they collapsed, with many dying from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer exhaustion. The exact cause remains a mystery, though theories range from mass hysteria to ergot poisoning from contaminated grains. These strange and tragic events highlight how history is often stranger than fiction. Story 12. During the Second World War, an extraordinary mid-air collision occurred during a bombing raid over Germany. Amid heavy anti-aircraft fire, 2 American bombers, specifically B-17 Flying Fortresses, collided. This happened when one bomber ascended to avoid the anti-aircraft fire, and the other descended. The collision locked the 2 planes together, with the upper bomber's belly turret becoming lodged into the lower bomber's fuselage. Tragically, the turret operator in the upper bomber lost his life on impact. Remarkably, the pilot of the upper bomber managed to control the combined planes, keeping them stable long enough for the surviving crew members to bail out safely. Once everyone had escaped, the pilot and co-pilot crash-landed the planes and survived. This event remains one of the most astonishing incidents in the history of aerial combat. During the Second World War, the Soviet Union developed an unusual experimental weapon known as the KT-40 flying tank. This innovative design involved a lightweight tank modified to glide into battlefields. The tank was to be towed into the air beneath a larger aircraft, released at altitude, and then glided down to the battlefield. This concept aimed to deploy armored vehicles directly into combat zones, without requiring traditional methods of transportation. While the KT-40 successfully glided and landed during initial tests, the project was ultimately abandoned. The practical challenges of towing a tank into combat, and the significant risks involved, meant that only one prototype was ever built, and it was never used in actual combat situations. And that's a wrap on tonight's collection of jaw-dropping facts that sound too crazy to be true. If these blew your mind or left you questioning everything you thought you knew, don't forget to subscribe to Panda's Nightmares. For more fascinating and mind-bending content, hit the like button, follow for updates, and check out my other videos for even more unbelievable stories and facts. And one last thing, if you can, please consider supporting my dad's medical treatment through the GoFundMe link in the description. Your kindness and generosity truly make a difference. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. Stay curious, stay amazed, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.